Hello, I'm Mary Ito, and welcome to the Cram Podcast. Cram is an acronym for Communicating Research and More, which is what we try to do on this podcast. A lot of exciting research and groundbreaking ideas never reach the public, but they have the potential to change the way we think and act. In this age of information overload, it can be difficult to decipher what is factual and true from something that's made up, erroneous, or a downright lie. Enter fake news. It's a phrase we've heard a lot of in recent history, but my guess is that fake news of one kind or another has probably been around for centuries. But according to Ahmed Al-Rawi, the difference today is that fake news is much more insidious, pervasive, and dangerous. Fake news can reach millions of people instantaneously through social media, sometimes with disturbing results. Ahmed Al-Rawi is an assistant professor in the School of Communication at Simon Fraser University, and he's director of the Disinformation Project. Hello, Ahmed.
Hello, Mary. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being on the podcast. I wonder if we could start and you could define fake news today.
We, as scholars, don't really have, let's say, a consensus or an agreement about what constitutes fake news or how to define it as a concept. But in general, it's all about false information. The problem we have today is there are so many concepts or so many terms that are in circulation, like disinformation, misinformation, infodemic, conspiracy theories, and so I can continue. But simplify it, I think fake news is all about false information that is found online or in the news.
Is it as simple as that, or is there some kind of intent implied or involved in the term fake news?
Today, the meaning of fake news has become hollow, mostly because of its politicization and overuse, as well as misuse by many people, including politicians. One example I can give is the former US President Donald Trump, and the way he actually weaponized the term in a way to attack his opponents. So for him, CNN is fake news because CNN is usually critical of his own policies. And any journalist who would report on Trump in a critical way would become a fake news reporter or journalist. In other words, fake news as a term has, as I said, become a hollow term, weaponized by certain groups and parties and figures in order to discredit their opponents and attack them.
Okay, so my understanding then is there are a number of connotations involved with it depending on how it's being used.
Since the beginning of time, as you just mentioned, we have been using fake news, false information, since we were as human beings.
Hunters and gatherers, maybe.
That's true. To frighten our enemies and create some fear by pretending that we are probably stronger than what we really are, and so on. But if you look at the use of the term fake news, it's actually been employed in different ways. For instance, in terms of parody. So the website The Onion is well known for having parodies just for fun or humor. It also could be related to satire, the use of satire. So Jon Stewart, with his well-known show, the comedy show, back in time, he actually called it the fake news show because he didn't want people to believe in what he was talking about. It was just providing some kind of critique of U.S. policies.
Oh, but the irony there, too, is that a lot of people ended up watching it for news. They actually liked his form of satire and believed that more than what might be called, real mainstream news.
This is true. And if you look at the poll surveys on Jon Stewart, he was regarded as one of the most trusted people in the United States. So it's a bit ironical. Other meanings of the word, as I just said, could be false information or manipulation. Even propaganda is also connected to fake news.
Yeah,
so different things and advertising.
You mentioned propaganda. When you think about it, that is maybe the precursor to what we call fake news today, right?
That's true.
Propaganda.
Yeah.
And there are
Today,
different
of
kinds of
course,
propaganda, right?
there are different types of propaganda. Again, scholars don't have a totally agreement about what propaganda is, but usually they classify it as black, which is intentionally aiming to mislead people, or white, which means it's factual, but it's promoting a certain regime or party, or gray, which conceals the identity or the source of information in a way to convince people that the message is coming from legitimate sources like grassroots organization. And we have so many examples here in Canada and elsewhere about how great propaganda is being used, or disinformation. Call it whatever
Yeah.
you want. I mean, in my mind, it's just false information whose intention is to mislead people and confuse them.
Well, so I'd like to just go back to your own story. I mean, how did you get interested in this field?
I'm originally from Iraq. And when I was working in Iraq and studying, back before, of course, 2003, I was like really looking closely into the events and the developments. And at that time, I was working for the International Red Cross as a communication officer, and I was shocked to see how the United States government used fake news to invade the country. Actually, we ended up with a failed state today. And ironically speaking, because of fake news, I'm now talking to you because I had to leave Iraq and, of course, seek employment elsewhere. But
Sorry, so
that's
let me just
yes,
ask you, when you say you were shocked by the fake news the US government used, are you talking specifically about weapons of mass destruction?
exactly. And of course, other accusations
Hmm.
that Iraq was connected to Al Qaeda and so on and so forth, with that proved to be all fake, manufactured by the Bush administration to justify waging the war on the country. And here we are. We ended up with afterwards ISIS and so on. But notice how the issue of information weaponization has been used a long time ago, but we never talked about it. Like, it was not in the public discourse. It was only in 2016 that people started talking about fake news and the Russian interference in the 2016 US election and Trump coming to power. That has become like a buzzword. And today, of course, we're talking about it in more details with the Russian invasion of
Hmm.
Ukraine.
Well, it is interesting that your own personal example is, in fact, a literal example of weaponization.
Here we
Yeah.
go.
Hmm.
And the impact of fake news on people's lives. And here I am. I'm real, like in the witness that fake news actually does have an impact on people.
So, so you lived that example. Was it a passion to explore this further, to uncover what was going on? I mean, what was behind your drive to pursue this in research and your life's work?
I mean, what I think drives my research mostly is to identify bad actors on social media or on the internet and trying to find out their intentions and who they are and what is the intended impact of their messages. This is something that drives my research in general. So I looked, for example, at state-run trolls and the way they targeted Canada with misinformation. I also looked at misinformation targeting the Middle East. And I examined COVID-19 and misinformation around vaccines. We looked at far-right groups in Canada and the issue of disinformation and hate. I even published studies about the way illicit drugs, like we have fentanyl, how it's being promoted by drug users, by drug dealers on social media, and the kind of strategies they follow, and so on. So I
Mm.
looked at so many different bad actors and the way they try to promote messages, mostly concealing their true identities. And that's something that fascinates me because I am really bugged. Like, I get really upset when I see people pretending to be something else and then trying to influence others.
Yeah, I want to get into some of those examples that you mentioned, but just before we do, I find I mean, you defined what fake news. It can be, it's news that isn't true, not based on fact. It's misinformation. Any one of those terms you want to use. But in order to start from somewhere and to know what you're looking for, you have to measure it against what is considered the truth or a fact, right? In order to know whether it is fake or misinformation. So to me, it's really kind of slippery, isn't it? Because someone's fake news may be someone else's truth. And what I mean by that is it's one thing if it's, let's say, a statistic and someone says, there were 1 million people in the crowd that day. Well, you can count the number of people and say there weren't 1 million people. There were actually 250,000 people. But when it comes to something that's in more of a gray zone, that's not really a statistic, right? How do you then determine this is what the fact or this is what the truth is, and now I'm going to investigate and research what is fake news out there?
This is an excellent question. When we look at information and we try to what they call fact check it, we avoid in all ways fact checking or assessing opinions and values. Like when you say the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party is bad, that's an opinion. And you cannot fact check it. That's someone's, let's say, attitude or let's say, value or opinion about a political party. This cannot be fact checked. But we look at some kind of consensus around events and issues that we all agree on. Like, for example, the earth is not flat. You cannot say the earth is flat. Or when there is a war and you have belligerent parties and aggressors, there is an agreement on what is going on. Like, for example, now in Ukraine and so on. Or, for instance, the number of casualties, or the let's say the mass killers, and so on. There is an agreement. Everyone knows when it comes to the Quebec mosque shooting who was the attacker. So if you try to promote the idea that someone else conducted the attack on the Quebec mosque shooting, that's definitely fake news or disinformation or whatever you want to call it. So we rely on a baseline, which is the consensus about the events, issues that happen, and we look at the facts, and that's how we proceed. Anything else when it comes to opinions, we avoid.
So then you started the Disinformation Project, right? And what is the purpose of that?
Good point. I got funding from SHRC, which is the Social Science and Humanities Research Council, to look specifically at two things, but I expanded the project in many ways. I was supposed to look at two things, and that's where the funding, happened. I look at number one, Canadian journalists themselves. I wanted to see how the Canadian journalists view, define, and report on fake news and the challenges of working within this area. And look at the news coverage referencing fake news and disinformation. So that was the first stage. The second stage was just looking at social media and specifically Twitter and to a certain extent Instagram. And we just wanted to see when people use the hashtag fake news in association with references to Canadian issues or figures like, for instance, Justin Trudeau, what do they say? So two simple things: Canadian news media and social media references to Canada and fake news. But of course, I expanded. We look now at so many other areas involving fake news and disinformation.
So yeah, let's tackle a few of those. Can you give me some examples of research you've done into fake news in the public sphere in Canada?
So the one on social media, for example, was interesting because we looked at all the references to fake news as the hashtag on Twitter and Instagram in relation to mentions of Canadian cities and, let's say, political figures and so on. That was long before the convoy protest ever happened. And we were shocked to see that to see a lot of political polarization happening. It's just like very distinct two sides fighting, not even talking to each other, but really accusing each other of different things. So on the one hand, we saw anti-liberal voices that far exceeded the number of anti-conservative voices. So two main parties available. And we also found, to our surprise, Instagram to be very much weaponized or ahead in terms of this kind of polarization. So the common perception about Instagram, it's like a place for sharing pictures and nice things, but we actually found it to be very political, unlike our initial expectation.
That's interesting. Can I just stop you there? Have you found that to be generally true? Do you find that depending on the social media, they are going to be actually distinct in how people use it? What kind of fake news is there? The amount of fake news? I mean, is there actually a distinction?
Definitely. Especially today, if you look at, let's say, non-traditional social media outlets like Telegram, Parler, or BitChute, Getter or Gab, I can list a lot of them. You will see the content completely different. One example, the convoy protest. Like I downloaded all the tweets referencing, I stand with the protests, the convoy or convoy 2022, all of them, over 10 million tweets from Twitter. When I looked at controversial, hashtags or let's say references to the QAnon conspiracy theorist group or references to COVID-19 being a hoax and so on, controversial hashtags. I honestly was surprised to see very little, let's say, messages around this, like really handful of messages. Now, this could be because maybe Twitter was moderating the content, but the end result was a limited number of tweets referencing these things. Yet, when I looked at Telegram, where, like, for example, popular channels discussing the convoy protest, the picture was completely different. Factual, opinion-related messages on Telegram were limited, yet the conspiracy theory and disinformation messages were the most dominant. So it's a completely different picture. There are many reasons.
I'm just wondering, because you raised it. Do you think that perhaps censorship is a significant reason?
Could be. As I said, there is a possibility and there is pressure on them. But the main reason is because a lot of fringe groups have actually migrated from traditional social media like Instagram, Facebook, especially after being banned. Like Trump was banned and so many other controversial figures like Alex Jones were banned from, from traditional social media. Faith Goldie was banned from Facebook, yet she's still on Twitter, which is weird. So a lot of them started migrating, moving from one, place to another.
Right, to another, yeah.
That's where they are now.
Yeah, let me just go back too, because I want to pick up on what you said, that you noticed this division and extreme positions on both the left and right long before the convoy protest. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering what you make of that. I mean, have you found that social media can be an indicator of some kind of momentum later on, that it becomes an alert, and I don't know, maybe that was just a unique example, but just based on what you've seen, can it often, be a warning, a red flag, a signal? I don't know.
Definitely. We use social media content in predicting so many things. Definitely. You can use it as a predictor of public attitudes about certain issues, and it could give you some kind of red flags or indications of different things.
But how far do you take that? Yeah, sorry. How far would you take that though? Because not everybody is on social media, right? And maybe depending on the social media platform, it's more of one demographic than another. So then, how do you get a sense how pervasive that attitude or pattern is? You right? Like, I don't know what kind of demographics you're using, your algorithms, how many tweets or posts you need to see before you can say, you know what, there's something significant about this.
No one knows. We, as researchers, observers, policymakers, analysts, whatever you want to call them, journalists, would get hints, cues from what they see around them, and accordingly, they would reach certain kind of conclusions or support specific arguments. But the more evidence you have, the more convinced you become that something is going on.
Well, when you
So what?
mentioned, yeah, sorry, when you were looking for fake news, you were mentioning, I can't remember how many tweets you looked at. Was it 5 million or
Usually
10
in the
million?
millions,
In the
depending on,
millions?
of course, the case study you're looking at. But there is no clear answer about how many you need to reach certain conclusions. It really depends on the case study. Sometimes a few hundred or a few thousand tweets or messages could be more than enough to figure out something is going on. It really depends on the case study you are
Yeah.
looking at. But the important thing here is you need to gather, as an investigator, analyst, as much evidence as you could. So if you, for instance, investigating something controversial, social media could be useful, but also the search engines could give you another indications. So, for instance, Google itself has its Google Trend option or feature, whereby you can see, for instance, how certain words are trending in Canada or elsewhere. You can even zoom in by specifying which city you would like to, investigate. So even Wikipedia has like a page view, how many views a page on Wikipedia has received. So you can even look at that. So there are so many ways and procedures and methods that you need to follow to get what I call confidence in something is going on. Notice I'm saying confidence because we really don't know. So it's not science, in other words.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, can you give another example, perhaps, of influence of fake news in Canada? Oh,
One
you
example,
mentioned the election, even.
yeah,
You
I mean,
mentioned that, yeah.
I looked at a study about foreign interference in our elections because I made use of Twitter's public data sets that were released a few years ago, and they are still releasing them. These are terabytes of data. Like, I'm not talking about gigabytes, terabytes, like thousands of gigabytes. It's very tough to use and process, but I was curious to see how the Chinese, Arabs, Iranians, and Russians talked about Canada. So I was shocked to see that the most active were the Russians, followed by the Iranians in terms of targeting, talking, discussing Canada. And
You
what
mean
was
in
shocked,
what way, though? Like, in what way discussing? Any way, or in a negative way, or?
when I do my research, I start with a very open-minded approach. I would like to see how the data talks to me and what is found in the data. This is very important, I think, because if I impose my own preconceived idea about what I will find, I might not see well. So it's really important to let the data talk to you in order to figure out, okay, what are they doing? What are they trying to say in these tweets and the associated videos and images? Yeah. So what was shocking, and this is a peer-reviewed published study, was that the Iranians during the 2015 election, then Justin Trudeau came to power, they were actually disseminating the idea that Stephen Harper was a CIA agent and hired by the CIA, and they were referencing a fake WikiLeaks cable, completely fake. And they were also making use of some Canadians in order to promote that idea. Mostly, by the way, writing in French because they were targeting the Quebec audiences. They worked on that. Russians, on the other hand, they actually supported the conservatives, and they were attacking all liberal politicians, specifically from visible minorities. And they never stopped. The Russian trolls never stopped, like 2015 up to 2019, mostly promoting the far right in Canada, sowing division, trying to create some tension, and attacking the liberals. So we have like two completely world views Iranians and the Russians. They were the most, let's say, sophisticated, systematic in the way they targeted Canadians. Then the Arabs came.
Yeah. No, go. Oh, sorry. Go on. The Arabs.
The Arabs were mostly Saudis. They were, of course, not happy with the way Justin Trudeau was dealing with the Saudi issues. So they made use of or discuss indigenous matters and issues, trying to shame Canada that Canada has no business interfering in the internal affairs of Saudi Arabia because they already have human rights violations with regard to indigenous people. And then they, of course, started targeting Saudi dissidents and human rights activists living here in Canada, like Omar Abdulaziz, who lives in Montreal, accusing him of being an ISIS sympathizer or follower in order to discredit his cause.
So the fact that you were able to identify where geographically these tweets were coming from, how easy or how difficult is it to uncover who these so-called bad actors, right? Because that's your whole goal. You're trying to find out who the bad actors are. How did you do that?
For that study, state-run trolls, I relied on Twitter. So Twitter mentioned that these are the tweets sent by or promoted by Saudis, by the Chinese, and so on. That's how I relied on it. Now, making sure that, or let's say geolocating messages is almost an impossible mission, especially when it comes to social media. You can fake it in many ways. Conceal where you are from. But there are hints always. There are so many hints and cues you can use, depending, of course, on what you are looking at. Because, people lie, number one, and they can, provide false information on their profiles, including Twitter or Facebook. So you take it with, you deal with it with suspicion. You cannot take it at face value. You have to doubt it. But again, it really depends on what you're looking at. If it is a website, there are actually tools that would help you identify, for example, let's say the IP address, the source of the website, and see the connections of one website to others. So really depends on what you're looking at, but there are always ways by which you can identify bad actors. They always leave traces. That's the
there's always a footprint.
Yes.
So can you give me perhaps another example? I mean, what has been one of the most startling examples to you of fake news
in Canada or
anywhere? Yeah.
The most shocking thing I found was related to Jamal Khashoggi. I know it's not related to Canada, but he had actually a Canadian connection with Omar Abdulaziz, the guy I mentioned to you, because they were.
So just give us a little background for those people who may not know.
Okay, so Jamal Khashoggi was a Washington Post journalist who was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul after he went inside. He disappeared. He never got out. He had a connection with Canada because he was supposed to work with Omar Abdulaziz, the Saudi human rights activist, in creating a cyber army to attack the Saudi regime, because the Saudi regime is really active on Twitter. So I found in my investigation of Jamal Khashoggi that the Saudis were very organized in attacking Khashoggi the day he actually disappeared. So I found that just 4 hours after he went into the consulate, there was not even yet news about him being killed, whatever. There was only a report by Reuters and a few other news agencies that he's inside. No one knows what is going on. Just 4 hours after he went into the consulate, a whole campaign on Twitter using the hashtag Khashoggi's scandals in Arabic was launched by different people using the same hashtag, attacking him and also trying to discredit his cause and tarnishing his reputation.
Do you know who those? Do you know who those people were? Who were the bad
according to
actors in that
Twitter,
case?
they were Saudi trolls, but of course, no one reported on it. That's what I found. I found a very coordinated, organized campaign launched by tens, if not hundreds, of different Twitter users, all using the same hashtag just a few hours after Khashoggi disappeared.
Do you feel?
And these,
Yeah. Do you feel it was too many to be a coincidence?
there is no way it's a coincidence because it does not make any sense. Like out of nowhere, like I was like tracing the references to Khashoggi from the beginning until like the latest messages released by Twitter, and they only spiked 4 hours after he disappeared. So there is no way this is a coincidence. This is clearly an attempt, a coordinated attempt to discredit his reputation, and especially targeting audiences in Saudi Arabia, because they probably predicted that people will start complaining, or let's say talking critically about the Saudi regime. So they were trying to maybe sway the public opinion about this guy, about Khashoggi.
Mm.
And these campaigns never stopped. They continued on the following days and using a variety of other hashtags, all critical, all attacking Khashoggi. Even his fiancée was attacked, accusing her of being a Turkish spy.
How well known is this information?
Like, I published a study, it's peer reviewed in an academic journal. I even notified a Washington Post journalist about it. Now, no one ever mentioned it, but I'm not sure. I'm really not sure.
But when you came across this and saw all these thousands and thousands of tweets, you were shocked?
Definitely. Like, I was shouting and screaming because this is big. Yet I was a bit surprised by the lack of attention or engagement about this issue. I think it's a big thing. But, my job is to work, publish, and like, I'm not seeking publicity, because for me, publishing a peer-reviewed paper is more important than, many other things.
No, but the thing is, what does that tell you? The fact that happened, what does that tell you? And I don't mean just about that incident, because I think you've said what it tells all of us about that incident, possibly. What does it tell you in a big way about what can happen, how social media is used, who the bad actors are?
Well, it consolidates your previously held views about the way social media is being weaponized, and how trolls are actually gaming these platforms. They have the upper hand in many ways, by which they could monopolize the discussion online and take control of what happens.
Mm-hmm. And I also wonder, I mean, it's one thing if you identify the source, the bad actor, himself, herself, whoever it may be. What about people who unwittingly retweet fake news? And that can happen too in the thousands and thousands. They don't realize that it's fake news, but then it keeps getting retweeted and retweeted. I mean, how much of a problem is that?
Definitely a big problem, because they are spreading and popularizing controversial types of information without cross-checking it. So this is one of the major issues we have today with fake news. A lot of the people involved do not really realize that they are engaged in further spreading bad types of content. Sometimes they are not aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I always say it, before sharing. Please check your the sources, see whether the information is credible or not, and so on. Because if not, they are actually just exasperating the problem that we already have.
Well, I mean, you just mentioned, of course, Ukraine war earlier, and I wonder if you could give any examples from that that are troubling regarding fake news, and perhaps as well with the public. I think oftentimes the fake news seems true, it's so difficult to know whether that video is in fact real, true, or not, right? That we're seeing.
Yeah, that's one of the major problems we have. Because of the advancement of technology, we are facing a lot of challenges fact-checking sources. So a lot of what they call deepfake. Deepfake means a manufactured video, or it's doctored in a way, or montaged in a way to look real, but in reality is completely fake. This is one of the challenges we have today. So to examine such videos, we need some kind of tools and also skills that would enable us to identify them as fake. And talking about going back to your point on Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Russian has already weaponized the whole information, let's say, sphere. So they promote propaganda and disinformation about the war, starting from the war itself. It's called special military operation, I think they called it, Putin.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Even the name itself, the label, has been manufactured in order to show it as something neutral, or
Something other than war.
Something other than war, or something transient, that it's not going to last for a long time, and so on. It's all propaganda made by the Russian government. So they have their own news agencies like RT, Russia Today, and Sputnik, all promoting this kind of propaganda and disinformation. Ironically, a lot of the discussion today about this specific issue revolves around how Putin has failed in promoting his own narrative. But I laugh every time I see this, because maybe in English language, yet if you look at non-English languages, you will see that the Russian propaganda is far more dominant than everything else. So I looked at Arabic, I looked at other languages, and it's actually mostly Russian propaganda spreading everywhere. And people really, a lot of people really believe in that. So this is a huge problem. So when you talk about the information war, here in the West, we are actually losing, because we are only like looking into our own bubble. Oh, it's English. No, it's far away from that. That's why we need to look beyond what is happening.
But do we have to be careful in that, is it necessarily one-sided in a war, right? I mean, we're on the side of Ukraine. We're against Russia. But what about us? Do we need to cast a critical eye on what we produce as well, and whether we produce any propaganda?
Yeah, of course. No, that's very important. That's how we proceed as a democratic country.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be critical first of what we produce and what we consume. That's for sure. But the problem with the Russian news outlets is that the majority, or the dominant news stories, are meant to propagate or promote the Russian government. You have mostly propaganda and less factual reporting. That's the problem. That's why we mistrust these sources, the Russian news sources. It's because of their direct connection with the Russian government. And they are actually part of the Russian regime. And this happens because authoritarian governments usually are in control of their own news outlets, like what happens in China and many parts of the Middle East and elsewhere. So you cannot really trust them.
So, in your research, are you looking at all sides of the equation? You look at what Russia's producing, what China's producing. You look at what the U.S. is saying, what Canada's saying, what Ukraine is saying, what the UK is saying. Do you try to see sort of a holistic view of how the war and everything is being interpreted?
That's the ideal thing, but we don't have the resources actually to do all of that. And instead, we take case studies or specific incidents or examples to show that one party is lying, one party is not saying the truth. I mean, the ideal thing is an ongoing evaluation and assessment of all the parties involved in promoting or in talking about the war.
Mm-hmm.
But like in my own project has like now no zero funding now because we like I finished all the projects. But this one, my article on the Russian war in Ukraine has just been my own interest in this issue, including now this interview is my own interest in talking to you about what is going on.
Yeah, I mean, as you said earlier, the technology has advanced so quickly. Do you feel is it often a catch up where you're
Yes.
trying to catch up with what is out there and trying to, I mean, it's difficult to even stay one step ahead.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So,
the deep fakes, and we have even now mobile apps creating these deep fakes for you in the palm of your hand. So this is a huge challenge, and I don't think we are up to that challenge yet. And even, I mentioned this elsewhere. When I looked at Russian and Iranian interference in our election, it was after the fact. Like what we need to have is like after few years, I was able to report on it, and it was then then covered in the news media.
Yeah.
So,
and so let me ask you too. Once you analyzed it, and then a few years later, you reported it. Did you feel that kind of interference from those countries had any impact at all on our election, the way the Russians had an impact on the U.S. election?
To be scientifically accurate, I can safely say that the Russians and the Iranians attempted to influence our election, yet it's not clear how many people were influenced or whether they were influenced at all.
Mm-hmm.
To be scientifically clear.
Right.
Yet, of course, we have the results of the 2015 election. Justin Trudeau came to power, right? But we really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to media effect and impact on our lives, as researchers, we know very little. For many reasons, including the fact that all of us are different. The way you receive information is different from the way I receive it. Some people take it with a grain of salt, others would doubt, others would maybe receive it wholeheartedly. There are so many variables involved.
No, that's true. You're right. And then even you put on top of that the layer of the pandemic and how we receive information. That is so true. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it depends on the source, it depends on the message itself, and it depends on you as a receiver. So many variables, and we don't have a clue, honestly, about how media influences us. But there is one common thing. Many times we allow media to influence us. We allow media to influence us in many contexts. For example, if I am, let's say, conservative Republican, I am more likely to trust news from Fox News. So I allow Fox News to influence my views and opinions. So there is some kind of
you mean a reinforcement?
To consolidate, exactly, because it corroborates with my own ideology and political, and vice versa. If I'm liberal, I'm more likely to probably trust CNN. At other times, we open up to media. We allow media to influence us. Best example is music. If you are bored, you say, okay, I'm going to listen to music to change my mood. So I'm allowing media, which is now music, to influence me. Because, like opening the door. The same with the news. You open the door if you, for instance, want to, or if you trust the source. So we know that for sure. But again, we differ on how impactful it could be, how influential it could be when it comes to the type of message. But it definitely has an impact.
So then, I mean, you're so entrenched in this research and you have a lot of knowledge of what's going on out there, in particular on social media. How do you, I mean, I can't really see putting an end to it. what can we do at most? I mean, how hopeful do you feel that, we can impede it? We could slow it down. We can curb it. We can, make people more aware in their critical thinking about how they approach it. What do we do at this point?
It's just like the Wild West of information now we have on social media. It's like a jungle where like no laws are applied. I know now there is more pressure on social media platforms to do more and to curb misinformation and so on. But it's still there. And I don't think it can disappear. It's part of who we are as humans. We always try to find loopholes and trying to game the system. So
Mm-hmm.
it will stay. So I always say this, that it's probably better that we protect ourselves. We call this pre-debunking, which means to be inoculated against bad information. Get more training, be exposed to it, and be aware that this is the kind of bad information. Be careful, because next time when you see it, and you will see it, you have to be well protected. It's just like, these scam messages we get sometimes on our mobile
Yeah.
phones, or we get these scam phone calls. Maybe the first time you might be a bit, maybe convinced that it looks a bit credible, but the more you get these messages, scam messages, the more protected you become. And then you will know exactly not to open the links. It's exactly similar when it comes to fake news.
And do you say that because you don't feel fake news can be stopped, or is it because you do not want to have censorship, and that
Both.
that you believe that that the freedom of speech on social media should exist?
Definitely, I am with that, because that's why we are a democracy, right?
Are you hopeful at all? I mean, I don't know where you see where we are right now, but are you hopeful?
Yeah, I am very hopeful.
After everything you see?
Yes, I am very hopeful. The fact that we have talked about it and that we are able to identify some of these things, bad types of content, bad actors, is really important. Now we know more. If you go back in time, 2016, we were like taken by surprise by the way the Russian trolls were manipulating platforms and micro-targeting audiences and trying to influence people. But today we are far more aware, familiar, knowledgeable about these attempts and campaigns. And we are better protected than before. And I think these kinds of discussions in the news media, and also the kind of public discourses and reporting on it, will help us be even stronger and better protected in the coming years. Technologies, as you said, are evolving. So we need also to be on top of these new developments. But I'm really hopeful that we are now in a better place than what we were a few years ago.
A fascinating discussion, Ahmed. We could go on and on talking about it. We'll have to have you back on the podcast. Really appreciate your sharing all this with us.
Thank you again for having me.
That is Ahmed Al-Rawi. He's an assistant professor in the School of Communication at Simon Fraser University and director of the Disinformation Project. For more on him and the Disinformation Project, research, publications, please check out our show notes. That is it for this edition of the Cram Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Our thanks to the Temerty Foundation for their generous support of our podcast. And you might also be interested in our literary podcast called Passage to Wonderland. I highlight compelling passages from books that offer discovery, insight, and a sense of completion for the end of your day. You'll find Passage to Wonderland wherever you get your Cram Podcast. Thanks very much for joining us. See you next time.